Hi everyone. There is like literally no smooth way of bringing that music down. It's like literally all or nothing. But that was Nightbusters' new single, which is called Mirrors, which So Young Records are putting out at the moment. I'm really, really pleased to be joined by Sam this evening. So Young have been turned into quite the empire. And Sam's been at the helm of it for a number of years. And it's kind of scary to me actually how many years it's been, because it feels like so fresh, so new, and like still really, really exciting, and still like no one else. So to kind of retain that amount of character on not just a magazine, but now a record label and a clothing range as well in this many years is incredible. So I'm going to bring Sam in and not blow any more smoke up his ass before he comes in. Hi, Sam.
Hi.
It was today. I was trying to work out when it was that like So Young first started, and I think my earliest memory was like when I was at Rough Trade and you came in, and you were like literally children. Like, how old were you when you started So Young?
I wasn't that young. I just had a good moisturizer already, I think.
You were just a lot younger than us, basically.
Yeah, I mean, So Young this year is 10.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous.
But we're keeping it quite well. We're not, obviously, by me saying it now, but we're trying to keep it quiet because I don't know how long you can be called something so young as we age. So
I think that's fine, because it's not about you, is it? It's about everybody that's like that you're featuring. And I'm not being ageist. Like, you know, really great new bands can be older too, but it's about being new, isn't it? And kind of like it is being exciting and being like something that you haven't heard before. So I think it still makes sense. I think you can get as old as you want and it still be so young.
Yeah.
It's old as you feel. It's all right. It's fine.
I'm glad you think so. We'll take that.
So 10 years ago, it feels ridiculous talking about this, but like, how did you start? Like, what did it come from? Like,
yeah,
I think we talk about what you do with all of the different artists and all the different bands as what you do now, particularly with the label and everything. I think we need to kind of get a grasp of why it all began, so we know where it's come from.
Sure. So, like, first of all, I've not come from a place of like education within the music industry. So I couldn't have studied any further away from music as like a starting point. So Young from the music side, So Young is a fully illustrated, printed publication. Like at its core, that's everything that So Young does. Everything streams out of that, be it a label, clothing, live shows, whatever. But essentially, like So Young from the music side just came from pure fanship. So, the first buzz band that caught me was Parma Violets. So obviously, Kath, you would have worked on that band or around that band for your sins, and that was the band that I basically took to Josh, who was essentially the only person in my world that I knew like really connected on the same music, but mainly for like the past music that we grew up on. And then there was a band way back that I really tried to drag Josh along to, and he didn't come. And then once he finally got into them, they'd split up. So once they brought Parma Violets to him, he trusted me after Reading 2012, and then he trusted me, and we went to that show. And on the way home, he essentially said, like, we're going to make a magazine. And I had no idea what that really would mean, what it entailed. Josh studied illustration. He had an obsession with punk fanzine culture. His favorite artist was Peter Blake. All the collage work that you see in So Young is Josh, and the covers are all Josh. So, it was supposed to be this sort of flimsy, photocopied zine. And then bands started saying yes to our polite emails to do interviews. And the illustrations came back and they were full color and incredible. And we thought it would just be wrong to just photocopy this 5-page sort of A5 zine. So spent a bit more money than we planned and created issue 1 of So Young, which included, the likes of Parma Violets and bands like Peace and Skaters and Wolf Alice, or like those sort of bands at that point, which is now aging Wolf Alice profusely too. So from there, like,
sorry.
No, it's fine.
I was going to just ask how you were getting access to the bands, because I think, like, obviously 10 years ago they were all at a certain level, but a lot of them were still being represented, right, by like PRs and labels and stuff like that. So how are you convincing people that they should talk to you?
So one, I don't think we weren't aware of this. Like, this wasn't calculated in any way. Like, So Young was the only magazine we'd ever make. It wasn't like, let's make a magazine, what could it be? Or we weren't over aware of like what was around us. We always bought The Enemy every week. But the most exciting thing to us were the bands in the smaller features, the ones that only had 50 words about them at best. And, you get bored of Liam and Noel being on the cover every other week. Mm-hmm. So like that was kind of like a bit of like an impetus behind it. But I think we just created this original idea at the time of essentially every feature would be originally illustrated. And I had no idea to be honest, I didn't even know what a publicist was or a PR was until maybe like the 3rd issue, because we'd just go direct to the band if there was a band email on Facebook, or we go direct to the manager. And, there were just a couple who saw that there was nothing potentially like this and just like hopped on board. Parma Violets manager was one of them. The Swim Deep's manager was one of them. And I think, once we got a couple on board, and if we didn't, we were just quite happy to write about them because it's a fanzine ultimately. We were just trying to put our passions into it. And the longer you're around for, the more evidence there is that it could be worthwhile. Like, people start to say yes. And then like Rough Trade being another connection, like Jamie Woolgar, who's still the head of press there now, was one of the first real PRs to really like take us seriously and like come to the pub for a drink with us and usually tell us like what, I mean, that doesn't surprise you, I'm sure, but yeah, like give us this to a show and stuff like that. And it was like, whoa, this is mad and never the intention. But we basically just sent some really polite emails, and I feel like maybe we had an original idea and people said yes. So it was, and the interviews weren't particularly interesting, but they were maybe just delivered in a way that no one else was going to do at the time. I think the only magazines right then were like, you still had Q and stuff like that, but Enemy was okay. But like, you had like The Fly. I don't think even like DIY really was a magazine at that point. So yeah.
I think it was just ever depleting. I mean, one of my main jobs when I started in the music industry was as a PR. And it's just like, I'm 17 years in pretty much at this stage, and the landscape changes so rapidly. of like what outlets and what platforms are available for you to promote artists on, and like which ones actually have an impact as well. And it's like, and which ones are nice to deal with is always a thing as well, particularly when you're working with new artists or new bands who are a bit green around the gills and haven't really got a lot of experience in interviews. And you know, like there's a lot of situations that you could put them in that were quite intimidating for young bands. But I think everyone's always looking for something new, like something that fills a gap, that is another outlet, is another platform for a band. And I think So Young from very early on showed like a really great kind of like, I guess like a tastemaker, like, you know, like we used to call them like early adopters and all of that. But I think the you know, if you got featured or you got covered in So Young, then it put you in a certain group of artists. So it definitely became something that people were seeking. Like, did you find that happened quite quickly, that people were coming to you rather than you having to go to them?
I remember the first time someone came to us, I was like, wow, people people are after us now. But like ultimately the stuff we wanted to do, we were going after like for the first 10 issues, like realistically. And that's fine. But I mean, I think, and it's still the case, like to a degree now, is that ultimately So Young's just like a representation of mine and Josh's music taste. And it just happens to be shared with a wider community of people that we're very aware of. And and at times it might not be like my favorite thing in the world, but I actually know that there's a world of people now that it will like do something to. So I would still trust my judgment, but there's these different versions of that judgment in there as well. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think there's the one that really, like, the one crazy thing more recently is, because we've been around for a little while, is like, so there's bands like Lime Garden who we're now releasing their music, which is madness, but they read So Young since they were like 13, 14. And that's mental.
Oh my God.
It's those things that only happen if you're able to stick around for a while. So yeah, I think
that must be happening more though, right? Like that, yeah, it must be. There must be so many bands around now that are just like, yeah, that you were my first like music magazine.
Yeah. Yeah, possibly. And like all we strive to be is like the band's first print feature or a band's first cover, and you know, those things are what mean the most to us now, as in the same way that they did then, probably much more thought about now. But and there's a lot, and you know, the great thing about like alternative guitar music at the moment is like it's having like a bigger moment, and some of the artists that are on our covers are going on to do some really great things like Grammys and #1 albums, and that's pretty wild. I saw a friend of ours that works at Partisan Records, and she shared a picture of Fontaines holding their first ever print feature, and it was a copy of So Young, and like she reshared that memory from however many years ago, and it's like, wow, that's mad that we were their first print feature, we were their first print cover, and now, you know, yeah, they're Fontaines DC.
But now they're absolutely massive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. And I think, you know, bands like Fontaines, I guess when they first start, are super awkward. So doing like, you know, their first kind of interviews with people like yourselves that aren't those kind of like, you know, old school Q whatever magazine journalists and stuff, must be like a nice route in. It must be like a nice way in to do more things. And now look at them.
Yeah, I mean, we could do with some more bands at the level of Fontaines, but you know, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing that we've managed to stick around this long and that people value So Young as somewhere they want to go and like tell their story, even when they get to the point of releasing like their second and third album. That's the nice thing, that like, for example, Shame, who we put on some of their first ever gigs in London. We've been a part of their like touring shows around the country. We've done the first print features and covers, and now they're into their third record and they still want to do features with us, and they're still a really good relationship. So like, they're the things that probably matter the most, and that I feel like the most impressive things.
Yeah, that's really cool. So like when you were starting it, I guess like there wasn't an ambition for it to grow into what it is and what you do now. Like when did you feel that it was kind of like starting to set up a career for you, I guess?
Probably this year. Josh and I have always worked jobs alongside this, like up until the last maybe 9 months, we've been full time on So Young, and that's still with like fingers fully crossed that can like continue. But I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of justifying to our families, like this is legit. Like this is for real. Like people like us. We got copies in Japan. Seriously, it's. I don't know. I think I still don't necessarily know, like if it is, but we're just doing everything that we can to make it be that, you know. And I think there are a lot of, if we were just purely a print magazine, there'd be no chance, just because of the way that the world. And that's not like being a downer. It's just like we make a very unfashionable publication with printed in terms of printed media. But it's just, it's attached to a world of music which has huge history with printed products and physical products, and kind of leads to the vinyl thing with the label as well. But I do think that we are doing, ultimately, like our values seem important to people, and hope, and I still think there's a ton of people who don't know what So Young is yet, that are attending shows and of the bands that we are championing. So as long as people are still forming bands and they sound pretty good, then there's a place for So Young. And once we learn how to do marketing, we might find it.
So when did you start thinking about, I guess, about the fact that maybe to kind of like ensure that longevity, or to make like your life within it more sustainable? Like when did you start thinking, oh, maybe we need to kind of branch out what So Young is to people, or what it does, or what purpose it serves?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that we're doing now, to a degree, bar the label and like some like projects and partnerships that happen now and again, like we've probably been doing since the first couple of years. So like we released t-shirts since the start. We did like we did a issue 1 release party. So we've been putting on live shows since like minute 1. But they've all just sort of grown in sort of stature. Be that like, yeah, going on now that we, you know, tomorrow we're going to release like a whole collection, well, a capsule collection of clothing. And we're out at South by, and we did a nice shoot with a ton of great bands that happened to be out in Austin at the time. And, you know, we're putting some real thought and effort into that, and seeing that as like, maybe because bands have always worn our t-shirts on stage and things like that, and that's really nice, and thank you. So maybe like, you know, maybe there's something there, and maybe it's a way that it just kind of unites. Everyone loves wearing their band t-shirt, but I like to think that So Young represents like a world of music and a world of thought, and, you know, wear our t-shirts to show you're a part of it.
There is. I think this audience, like these type of music fans and bands, I think sometimes wearing t-shirts of like record labels or certain music venues, or like So Young t-shirts, I feel like it has the same kind of like stature or level as wearing bands t-shirts. I feel like it's just one big kind of ecosystem. So I think it's really great that you kind of tapped into that straight away and was just like, right, okay, this is going to be a range. Like this isn't just going to be a one-off. This is going to be kind of something that we can build on and grow. Yeah,
and like and to be honest, it just starts from Josh's passion for design. Like Josh is an illustrator and a designer, so we might not look like we love fashion, but we both talk about, you know, clothing and just everyday, like, you know, it all stems from youth culture and how people look and what people wear and what bands wear on stage. You know, what a band that excites me, or the band that I want to write about, is the band I want to be in, or the band whose world I want to be a part of. And that's the music they make, and the way they carry themselves, and what they wear. And I think it all just lives within the same world. So I don't think there was ever a time of like, we could make some money by releasing t-shirts. It's like, let's make our own t-shirts, because
to do it, it makes sense. Just part and parcel of what you're trying to put out into the world.
Exactly.
Tell me about the label. I want to know all about why in this day and age, you've gone from making a print publication to now like pressing records as well. Like what that means to, I guess, you personally as well. I think it's, you know, like for me, like releasing music and like don't tell anyone at the venue this is like my literal favorite thing out of everything that I do. Is like there's so much joy in helping, like, I guess, facilitate somebody putting their art into the world in whatever capacity that I can do it in. But what was it that kind of drove you to set up So Young Records?
It wasn't a love for profit. No. So we've been asked by many people, like, why don't you set up a record label, since maybe like year 2 of So Young, year 3 of So Young, and especially in around the time where there was that like South London, Brixton, Windmill, the original sort of scene of like the post Fat White scene of like Shame, Goat Girl, and Dead Pretties and all those great bands. Matt Maltese was a part of it then as well. And it was like, well, because we already make one thing that doesn't make loads of money and costs quite a lot to make, so why would we do another? And so if we were to do something, it's just like we just always want to do it properly. So yeah, so what we did is that we just made So Young Records t-shirts and just thought like that would be the box ticked. Like we can't make a label because that's silly. Let's just make the t-shirts. So that's what we did up until a point. And then we had like so we have a label partner, you know, so I'm not going to lie about that. It's not just like us doing it on our own, because that wouldn't have been attractive to us. But someone who had similar values to us as a, you know, as two people, and as two people with a passion for new music, basically said, why don't you start a label? And if you want to, we could help you do that. So the attraction of doing it, like Josh and I used to watch the documentary Upside Down all the time, and just like about Creation Records. And that was just like, I'll get home from a night out, used to DJ and stuff, whack that on and just like fall asleep. That was like part of the daydream, you know? So like it was always part, like the idea was like great, but actually doing it just seemed ridiculous. But now we have a great label partner who's basically allowed us to go and do things properly. So the brilliant thing about running a record label is, when it comes to So Young, it's always been about relationships. So I rarely deal just with a PR, and PRs probably hate it, but I'll always speak to the band direct, because I don't want the bands ever to think it's just like you're in the magazine because someone did a good pitch. It's like, actually, no, I love your music, and actually there's the live element, there's everything that we do that I want you to be a part of as well, or I want to work together on. So like we've always worked directly with artists and trying to sort things out. And actually quite often it's because the artists at that point, at the point we're first talking to them, don't have any representation. They might have a manager, but it's very rare they have a publicist. And like there is a period where like publicists would just go, yeah, you probably know them, but we've just taken these on, like just because they know I go. If they told me about something as if it was new, I'm like, yeah, I know. Look at so the label essentially just allowed us to then grow that relationship with things that really clicked with us, and invest in those artists beyond just a print feature and beyond a show, and beyond some social media posts. And that allowed us just to have some like meaningful relationships that essentially allowed us to work collaboratively. Which has been amazing. And then to actually then go, we are responsible for giving advice and feedback on music, and coming up with some ideas and strategies about how we release that music. Obviously So Young has a clear world for it to sit within, and we've got like a platform to be able to instantly put a band in. For example, with Night Bus, we've had like a really, really fast start, and it's not unexplainable, but it's quick. Like people are really into it really fast, and they only formed a band in June. So like they're having to almost play catch up with themselves because it's happened quite quick. And like to think that So Young Records is like a part of that, providing a platform. That's the music has to do everything else, of course, but it's just nice kind of plotting that with an artist and working out. And from Josh's side, his like dream would be to have a collection of artwork that you can look back on, similar to what Peter Savills done with Factory Records. And those things are really important. The values that are in the magazine exist within the label. The taste of the magazine exists within the label. So it's all just very much an extension, but has great relationships at the center of it. And then, you know, you get some wins that just feel a little bit different, you know.
What's the difference
People
for you
buying the viral. Go on, sorry.
What's the difference between like a band or artist that you would feature a few times in So Young to somebody that you would sign to the label? Like what? Because I mean, because you have to have that level of just like, I think this is amazing. I definitely think we should feature it. But actually releasing the music and investing so much time and finances as well is something totally different. Like what's that like upper rung? What is that for you that kind of makes you connected to the music in that way?
I think it does just, it's just like a gut thing. It's hard to really describe it in terms, because everything within So Young's pages does something for me. That's why it's there. But it's, maybe there's a part of like, well, is this band brand new and is anyone else looking after it? Because that's it, being available and feeling like it's something you could do is also like naturally going to be a part of the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But like, for example, so two recent examples. So Nightbus sent Way Past 3, the debut single, to me as a pitch for the magazine.
Right.
And my sort of main rule with the inbox, and the inbox is disgusting, is that if a band sends something direct, I will always get to it. Sometimes later than I plan to. Don't always open everything from every publicist in the world, because I get a lot of emails from like Sony like plugging their next big hip hop artist, and Sony obviously isn't the place for that. You know, and that's just like a lack of research on their part, and that's fine. But like when it comes to a band sending direct, it's, you know, taking real effort, and they've probably written that email 15 to 20 different times. So the least we can do is open it and listen, and, you know, provide either feedback or just say thanks, but not this time. And we'll try and do that. And Nightbus were one of those. And I just said, this is great. Like, what's the plan? And then chatted to Josh and said, I really like the song. I probably swore a bit, and I'm trying not to. And just went back and just said, look, can we, essentially I played the song about 10 times in an evening. And I think that's the physical action of the feeling.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing happened with Being Stellar. So, you know, another one that's had like an incredible 12 months. They sent Kids 1995 as a pitch to be released, to go on the magazine or on the site. And, you know, it was just another one of those songs I played 10 times in the evening, went to Josh and said, this is madness. Like, there's something here. When he agrees, like if he doesn't agree, I'm like, yeah, I'm just getting overexcited. He's a good measure. But when he's on board, and when we're both on board on something, it's probably like, I trust that it's got something about it. It's got something pretty special. And then you just hope that the idea of So Young feels good to them.
Well, that you go back and go, actually, we'd quite like to release this. And they're just like, nah, you're all right. Can we just have a feature in the magazine?
Yeah.
That hasn't happened, does it?
No, that hasn't happened yet. No. We haven't signed everything we've tried to. I'm not going to like be around the bush and try. Like, I'm not going to try and pretend everything's been like, yes.
Yeah.
This thing didn't happen, and that's either because they've gone on to sign like to big labels, or that their management just had different plans or whatever, and that's fine. But we still have featured all of those artists in the magazine since, and there's no, you know, if you're on the label, you can be in the magazine. If you're on the label, you could be on the cover, because So Young, ultimately, we can divide those two things, and we can see it, and it's more just a representation of the time. But, you know, just because So Young Records didn't work doesn't mean like there's like no relationship. Like, the key thing is
gone.
And the nice thing is, like, we're a relatively small label, so a band, and we're in our infancy, and like we're only just going to release like our first, like we released the Gently Tender album last year. We're going to start 2 more album campaigns this year. Naturally, some bands will start with us and won't finish with us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like heart-wrenching. But the great thing is we've still got So Young magazine as a platform to continue that relationship and the live side, because that's ultimately like what's important, is those relationships.
Did you go into it setting the label up thinking that you'd be doing albums?
Not initially. No, it's got way out of hand. Like, yeah. But fortunately, like, so so our label partners essentially said like this. So Folly Group was our very first release, and we just set like the most ridiculous high bar. And this isn't blowing trumpets. It's just like, this is silly. So Folly Group had 2 Six Music A-list singles on their debut EP. And it went really well. And then basically 3 months later, we had a phone call with our label partners. Like, should we think about albums a little bit sooner? So yeah, Folly Group didn't go on to be that conversation of the album, but essentially, I think it was just clear that there was like an appetite for the label from people, and it felt like, and essentially the team that we work with, they're essentially full time on So Young Records alongside Josh and I, and it just felt so. It felt like we could achieve it. If it was just Josh and I, and someone said, "Do you want to do albums?" I said, "Not a chance," because we wouldn't do them justice. Like we could probably get away with some singles. It's like, oh, it's a look and it's part of saying well, but actually like meaningful strategy to grow a band to like sell out the Forum and your Brixton Academies and things like that. And like that takes a real team. And unfortunately, like we've got that, and they're backing us to do some albums.
I mean, I think everything that you've said is really, really useful for people to hear, like hugely. I think there's a real desire for a lot of artists that they need to be working with a label in order to put a record out. That we still have that. And I think there's, people make decisions very rashly because they're desperate for that support. And they think, if we don't say yes to this album deal, it might be no one else that comes along. And I think what you've just said around the fact that if you hadn't been working with your like label partners, then no way would you be putting records out. Because there is like a bit of a kind of, it's a lot of trust to put into somebody, I think, is to collaborate on an album release. And I do think a lot of new artists, particularly like Liverpool-based artists, rush into those relationships and don't look at what that means for an album campaign. So like, and what like value those people that you're working with can add to that album campaign as well. So I'm really, really pleased that you said that. Because I do think it is like, it's a lot to undertake, isn't it? Like actually releasing someone's record and thinking about things very strategically. But what do you find is that kind of like when you're working with bands where that relationship is kind of forging over singles, and you are kind of working, and obviously you did it with Gently Tender, and like, how do you lift that into an album campaign from those like early singles? I mean, I guess Gently Tender a bit kind of, they've been around a bit.
Yes, Gently Tender was a strange one because they were not a strange one at all. Like we released an album when they could have released some follow-up singles or an EP, but they'd already recorded the album with Matthew E. White, and they were just like, if we don't release these songs, they'll just get binned because they're so old. And we just want to move on. And like, there was a longer version of that conversation that happened, but I basically had to convince them to do an EP.
Yeah.
And then I had to reconvince them to do an album once it came clear that we could do the album. But Gently Tender's made up of, former members of Palmer Violet. So it was like this kind of full circle moment of So Young, and they were the first album release. So it was like, so that was really cool. And then, but with Lime Garden, like, so that was just like a conversation that I had a long-term relationship with their, as in a professional relationship with their manager, from the early days of So Young. And she messaged me saying, Sam, you've got, I've just remembered you've got a singles label. And I was like, it's not a singles. But yes, we do have a label. And then from there, it was like the conversation had just sort of started. But they're a band who had a really good start. COVID got in the way of them massively, and they had to almost like start again. So we released an album for them to start again, essentially. So
yeah.
Whereas with Lime Garden, it's different. We are going to release their albums, and we are their label partners for their albums, which is amazing. And we're truly flattered that they're trusting us with that. But that started as, the deal was we were doing 2 singles, 4 tracks, and they'd released 2 songs before that, and it was just, working to try and raise their profile. They've got a great team, management and booking agent around them, who we worked collaboratively with to try and elevate everything together. And I think ultimately a label's job is just to try and elevate. You know, we're not trying to take anything away. We're not trying to add too much of our identity. It's just like, what can we do to just elevate the little things that we've felt because of them, and try and like expose that to more people. So with Lime Garden, it was like, okay, well, we've grown a band to a point where they've got million streaming tracks on Spotify and they're selling out rooms across the country. They're getting some great festival looks. Like the difficult thing is when you do a good job, and you've only got them on a singles deal, and then you want them for an album, and you basically create a competition for yourself. But fortunately, on this one, I'm sure lots of other labels were interested. They trusted us to carry on, but because we're so early as a label, you know, we can't commit to an album straight off the bat, and we don't. But you know, and it's just our job to try and show as much value as we can as a label to be trusted to carry on with things. And then also sometimes there's difficult decisions where, you know, where we just financially can't continue, but that doesn't, again, that's a conversation that, especially for the first time, is difficult to have. But then at the same time, like letting them know and showing that there's still like a full support from a So Young broader world as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's not it. That's not the end of the journey just because we can't continue it. What do you think are the biggest things that you've learned from setting the record label up that you've had to learn maybe quite quickly? Can you hear that ice cream van?
Yeah, I'm getting hungry.
When you first started putting records out, what were the kind of early lessons that have set you up that were really useful, that were maybe a little bit surprising?
I think an early lesson that Josh and I learned quite quickly, and not that we thought otherwise, but it's their music, right? It's theirs. We've gone from we created a magazine where we presented everything in our way, and we were there, you know, from an editorial point of view, from a visual point of view, and it's actually that we've collaborated with people with everything on So Young, from all of the community of writers. It always feels like collaboration, but when it comes to releasing records, ultimately, like, it's your ears on first and your mouth goes second. So I think that's part of that we had to learn, because ultimately, like, we've got like a vision of So Young Records in our head, which, you know, like I said, with the artwork that we can look back in a similar vein to like Factory Records, but ultimately, like, trying to find that balance of what we want to achieve with the label, what ultimately it's also the band's legacy when it comes to everything visual and the music they release. So that was like an early one, not necessarily music wise, but more on like the visuals. And then on like purely like just process, everything needs a lot of time. Like, if you want to release a single, there's a lot to get together, even just for a single, and like it's got to be pitched like 6 weeks before. That's masters in, you know, trying to getting your right press team and stuff together. I think like a lot of the early lessons we probably would have learned in terms of like press and radio, I've learned from So Young. So knowing like when I've received a half-assed pitch from a publicist who's cashed in on a band, like I see it and I read it and you can feel it. Like, and so getting a team on board who truly love the music and they're going to go and tell that story to the right people properly. Like, we learned that lesson through the magazine and we applied it through the label. So like we would never try and strong up. We know who like publicists are and whose publicist or which publicist's emails are going to get opened. That's one thing, and it's important.
Yeah.
But when they're opened, it's what are they saying? And are they going to, you know, put that proper bid in for you? So I think that was something that we'd learned from the magazine and applied to the label and seen real value in. Radio was a world we'd never worked within, and that's just been like it's so difficult. It's so strange. Feedback is difficult.
It's still like, I feel like radio has been the same since like the 90s or something. Not that I was like doing this in the 90s, but I feel like that's the area that is still very much kind of like, it's difficult to tap into if you're an artist doing it yourself, whereas like you can still get publications on board if you're an artist without a press agent. But radio still feels like you need that clout And it's still, even though, you know, we release music on the day and we don't have like a release date in the future, they still work like that. It's just, it's still, to me, feels like you have to really kind of consider like that. It's to consider it separately.
Yeah, and I just think that, you know, you're very limited with where music can go on radio as well. So it's like a tough one to do, and like the wins are particularly high when you do that. And like I said earlier, that we got some very early wins which were amazing with Folly Group. But then, for example, like Lime Garden, who are by far and away our highest streaming artist on Spotify, you know, most festival appearances, and you know, they're going to do everything this summer. They've not had a single play on Six Music.
Lime
So
Garden have
no.
is
So the other, I guess, another quick lesson would be like, there are lots of ways to do it. There's lots of ways to be successful, and it doesn't all hinge on Steve Lamacq.
Yeah.
Nice when he's on board, but you know, ultimately, like there's not just one route to take, and I think with Lime Garden, that's been a particularly frustrating thing for us as a label, and it's not something we really can comprehend, but it's happened, and we've had to find other ways, or just think about like what else is actually important for the band to move forward. And ultimately, they've probably got more fans on the ground than anything else on our label just now, and that's amazing.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really key one, is kind of like, you know, looking at the stuff that you have actually got control over, and like, but like, you know, with that and building it up there. But yeah, I mean, it's like Six Music's mad, and that's the thing about like new artists, is like, where, you know, trying to work out where to invest money, like wherever that budget is coming from, wherever it even exists, is like getting a radio plugger on board still doesn't guarantee that you're going to get that impact that you need from that kind of quite a substantial sum of money. Like, that's not the be all and end all, is it?
No, you're not buying results. That's the key thing. And if anyone ever wants to reach out to me and say, who would you go with for radio if I'm going to spend any money, or if this is my budget, where would you go with radio? I can point you away from the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think that is easier to do. Like, it's been really funny. I always forget this happens, because like I haven't worked on a single release for quite a while, and obviously we've got the Eyesore single out at the moment, and how many crappy emails they get sent like on a weekly basis during a single campaign, going, oh, I really like what you're doing. Like, do you want some help with your playlist pitching and your press and your radio? And like, Josh just ignores them. And then it's got to a point with one where you kind of like, I like, it's better coming from me than it is the band, where like we've had one from this particular press agency who do everything, which is always a bit of a red flag for me. If it's just like, we will help you out with everything that needs doing. Like, how the fuck, like, who's doing that? But I ended up just going, we have a strategy, thank you very much. And then just like, you know, because it's like 4 times in 1 week, you get so much noise. And my feeling is, if you get an email that looks generic in any way, shape, or form, and they're offering more than like offering the world, don't touch it with a barge pole.
I mean, I got an email from one of those companies this week telling me they love my music.
Oh, I get them all the time. My music on SoundCloud. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Trust me, no one would love my music. That's the fact.
I get them, and it's like, you haven't even put what artist it is as well. Like, you've just kind of found my email on someone's social media. It's ridiculous how many scammy emails get sent. And the other one is like, what's one that I get quite a lot is like, you've been selected for a Spotify playlist, and it's all like branded like Spotify for Artists, and then it's just like 000@gmail.com or something. Just, who's falling for this shit? But I think people must do, because you just wouldn't do it otherwise, would you? But I do think
a lot of publicists now are like pitching for the Spotify playlists. They're trying to like make that a part of their job.
What, pitching for like just,
so we
like,
have a playlist called the So Young List. We have a playlist called the So Young List, which a publicist will never ever have any impact on, apart from if they send me the music It won't be because they've asked to be on it that it will ever go on there. It will just be like, this sounds good, so it ends up on there. But they essentially are saying, like, as part of press reports, oh, we got it on this playlist. We got it on this
Oh yeah,
playlist.
yeah. Okay, yeah.
So, and maybe to a degree with some of them they are, but it's a like, it can be a murky world, but there are also some really good people there, and like press in general. And I say it's from someone who makes a magazine. Like, its value in terms of like real growth is like to be determined, especially online stuff. But like, there are some good people out there who will put a lot of thought into your music and will deliver it with the right level of care that's required for publications to get on board. And there are also some that, that will just take anything, or will be, reaching out to you on a daily basis.
I think it's still those like early interactions for me are really, really key. Like, even if it's somebody that I've targeted that I kind of quite want to work with, if they take ages to get back, or like I have to chase an email, which is something just listening to a track or something like that, I genuinely use that as a kind of like a bit of a litmus test that they're not that into it. Like, because I know what I'm like with stuff, and I think that's where it comes from. It's just like, if there's a band that I absolutely love or an artist that I love, and they send me something to listen to, I'll like literally make time to listen to it. And I think if you've got somebody that you're employing to speak to, like press on your behalf, to advocate on your behalf, then you want them to be really, really passionate about your project. And as long as you're, expecting them to email you back or speak to you in office hours, and it's just like they haven't replied to me, and it's like 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, I think that's just a really good gauge to start off with if you want to work with somebody. Because I think even saying before how much I love releasing music, I still find it quite anxiety inducing, because there's so many things that you've got to juggle, and there's so many things that you've got to action. So the idea of bringing someone in to take care of a quite an important element that have been a bit sketchy on replying, or like just not really kind of feeling like they're committing, feels like just an added world of like pain, basically, to bring into a project.
Yeah. I think ultimately, like, there's a lot of value in the people who say no. So like the people who have turned stuff down with that, and it's happened. Actually, I won't say, but there's people who've turned stuff down, but then they've also said yes to other stuff. So that just proves that there's a level of care and like curation to what they're doing. So like, the power of like saying no is frustrating at the time, but also when they do get on board, it just invokes that sort of bit of trust. Whereas I mentioned before, there are a lot of people who just seem to do sort of anything and everything, and it just ultimately makes you less up for opening their email, because you just trust it slightly less. And I'm exactly the same as you. As soon as anyone, who has that trusted relationship, or a band that I've worked with before sends direct link, or even if there's just a band has sent me something and it just fit, you look at it and you read it and it feels like it's come from space, I'll stop everything I'm doing to just listen to it there and then, because that's ultimately where everything So Young comes from, is excitement for brand new music and brand new artists. So yeah, you're right. Once it becomes like a bit of a dead space between sending that email and not receiving a reply, that's almost your answer, isn't it? And I wouldn't encourage chasing it.
Yeah, that's a question I get asked quite a lot, is just like, how far do I leave it until I have to kind of chase this person? And I'm just like, if you're wanting to give them money to work on your project, you shouldn't have to chase it. My favorite interaction in this area was with Dan from They Do. And so that's for those that don't know, They Do is a press and radio agency that's run by two people, Dan and Liv, and Dan does press and Liv does radio. And like, I think it was an ISIL single like a few years back, and I asked Dan for a quote to do, because we were already doing radio with Liv and it was going really, really well. And I asked Dan for a quote to do press, and Dan turned around and just went, "Don't pay me to do press. I can't guarantee at this stage that I can get you any more than you can get yourself," because he knows that I used to be a PR. And I was just like, whoa, that's so good. Like, he was just like, not yet. Like, I'll do it later on, but just do it yourself. Do it yourself. Save them. Do it yourself. And I think it had been a while since I'd had like a reaction like that, where it was just like somebody's honest, like just approach of, we had the money. We could have given them the money to do it, and it was just like, no, do it yourself. And we did end up getting like stereo gum and stuff like that, so it wasn't like, didn't go badly. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
went all right.
Yeah.
So Dan and Liv work on some stuff for So Young. Dan does Lime Garden.
Oh, sweet.
And Dan and Liv together did Folly Group. So Liv was the one who was responsible for taking them and doing their early wins at 6. But then, you know, similarly, we've used the same pluggers from a variety of companies that also haven't got the results, you know. So it's not always just about who, but there are definitely, like, you give yourself half a chance greater with who.
I like
ultimately the passion of the music.
Yeah, I just like having a nice time. So I think my approach, particularly with the bands that I work with, is just like, if we bring people into the team, they need to like just make it fun. And I don't mean that as in like, you know, like in a cheesy way of just like, oh, bring something, you know, crack some jokes or whatever. It's just like, I just don't want anything to be a stress. I just feel like stuff that, and again, it goes back to that, like focusing on what you can control and not what you can't. Is like, there's so much kind of stuff that you don't know whether it's going to happen or not, and stuff that you don't know whether, even to the point of like, is your vinyl going to come on time, or like, is that festival going to come in? There's loads of things that you just like, I don't know. So I feel like the stuff about bringing your team in and who you're working with is the stuff that you can control and do a good job of that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, don't make that into a stress. Make that into something that adds value to your project, adds value to the release. Is like who you're working with.
Yeah, we try and make it feel very much, because obviously everyone does their separate jobs, and you can quite easily, and like we probably did in the first couple of releases, just leave everyone to their separate jobs, and we'd hear back from one and we'd maybe pass on some feedback from another to try and help. But ultimately, like, whatever wins you get at radio is going to help whoever's at press, and whatever wins you get at press, etc., and whatever we get at Spotify. So like we essentially just have a thread, and like Being Stellar was a really good example, or Ben Stellar as they would pronounce it, because it's not Bean apparently. They had
now you
so we had like just a team that just felt so engaged together with them. So we just had a thread, and you know, and we do this for all artists, but it very much, like, every win came in and it felt very much celebrated by every part. You know, so Josh Scarrett, who was looking after radio, anything that came in from him was celebrated equally by us and management, but also like Tom Sloman, who was doing the press. So like, it just felt very collective, and that probably generated a level of the success as well, because the excitement ran through the whole team, and that then goes into how you're delivering and how you're talking about the band. And you know, then when they got Live Agents on board, they came in, and it feels really good. So when you get that team right, and it can feel collective, because ultimately, like, you know, Tom at press, his job isn't really affected if Josh can't get radio.
Yeah, it does help.
Yeah, they help each other, but ultimately, like, they could just go on, just get my focus is the wins there, but it was very much engaged across the board. So that was a really nice thing, and if you can achieve that, like, you can feel it.
Yeah. That's something that I was like used to really, really enjoy, is that kind of like connectivity when you've got a team that will appreciate each other and respect each other. And 9 times out of 10, they've all worked together anyway. Like, you know, there's only so many people who like cover so much music. Like, I haven't spoken to Josh for years, man. He's a sweetheart and a really, really great plugger.
He's doing all right. Yeah, he's doing pretty well.
But yeah, it's really, really nice when you do get that team that really do shout about each other's successes and do kind of celebrate that. And then it's, you know, that at the center of it can kind of reap the rewards of a team that, you know, that really kind of value each other's work. We haven't even touched on the live stuff that you've done. And I'm just aware that we've not got very long left. How does that, like, kind of, you know, like, I started off as a promoter. Like, that was the first thing that I did that was even music related. And I like would do it in Sheffield, so that I would bring bands to Sheffield that didn't come, like, just so that I could see them. And I just learned very, very quickly that it's the worst way of watching bands is to put the gig on yourself. But how did that kind of come into the So Young fold? Obviously that was very, very early on, that you started doing those gigs. And I guess again it comes to having, you know, an amazing group of bands and artists that you're supporting, like to fill those lineups. Like how
Yeah.
not so long, I think is what I'm asking.
I mean, it started off as collaboration. So like some of the like our first issue launch parties just happened to be at a club where we used to do DJ sets, and they always just have bands on. We just turned one of the nights into an issue launch. Like it was just one of those where someone was just willing to do that stuff for us, and we just curated it. I think the Magic Gang played. I think that was maybe our second one or something. And then it's just, like people, like there's a good friend of ours called, his name's Cal McRae. Like he was involved in loads of the stuff. Like he used to originally manage Wolf Alice and just been in and around the scene. He like invited us to come and do some events at the Old Blue Last, and we're like, oh, cult venue at the time. Like this is great. So we just turned up, booked the bands, told we had a bit of a budget, and then with every show just being curious to always want to be able to do something myself, and maybe that's like an inner control freak, which I pretend doesn't exist but does. Like just learn how, like what's supposed to be done and how can it be done well and when isn't it done well. We used to do a thing called Sound Festival, and that was like a 3-day thing at the Old Blue Last, like 3 nights on the bounce in the summer, and it just, like the first ever one we did, like had a queue from the venue down the stairs through the bar and outside, and that was like, this is mental. And we had some bands that were much bigger than the Old Blue Last come and play, like last special guest sets, and that was really cool. And then it went from that to, we went and did some shows at a place called the Five Bells in New Cross, which was only ever known as a hooligan pub for Millwall fans, to be honest. But they had this guy, his name was Samuel, and he basically wanted to turn it into a live place. It sounded awful, but it looked like something out of Only Fools and Horses. So Josh and I loved it. And like they had a PA, they had a stage, and he basically said, like, this could be So Young's Old Blue Last, like Vice have venues, right? So we're like, this sounds cool. And then we just put on like a bunch of shows there, and that's where we really had to learn how to rep things and do things proproperly. And like we ended up having, like, one of our nights there was Fontaine's DC, Squid, and Sports Team all on the same night.
Oh my god, that's mad! Like,
I think that was like for our 5th birthday.
So
that was pretty wild. And then we just, like, some festivals. We do some festival bits. I'm conscious of the time, so we've had a festival at a stage at Truck Festival in Oxford since I think the first year of us existing. They get us to like design the program, and then like the second year onwards, they gave us like a stage, and now we host the second stage there, so the biggest tent at the festival. We've had a showcase at the Great Escape for quite a few years, and we're really grateful for that, and always scared that won't happen every year, and grateful when it does. And had some brilliant moments there. Do some partnerships with Wide Awake. We did something at Left of the Dial Festival in Rotterdam this year, and then we've just come back from South by Southwest, where we hosted our first showcase, which was very expensive to do, but really fun.
I think what's jumping out at me is the importance of collaboration and partnership, like everything that you do. I think what really, I love that attitude of just like, particularly with the label and having the label partners, and it's just that it's not so much like we can't do it on our own. It's like we don't need to do it on our own. Like we can bring people in that are going to help us do it and elevate it and get it to a bigger level and do more for the bands. And it's amazing to see that in every kind of juncture that you're doing. Yeah, I think, and when I saw that you were going out to South by, I was just like, whoa, it is a hefty it's a hefty project to orchestrate, because it is so expensive and you want to try and make it as worthwhile as possible. It is kind of incredible, like just to kind of see how far So Young can go with everything.
I think with live in particular, is we've never really had an ambition to make money, and and everything that we've done is just because we want to get the people who are hopefully reading the magazine and now hopefully buying records, like in a room, and like essentially it's where everything makes sense, because those bands that we're talking about, we're writing about, we're releasing, are where are in a space playing live to the people who were listening and reading. So like that's where it all sort of comes together. Like Cal used to always say, like, one day you'll put a ticket price on these shows and you'll make some money. So now we just want it to be free and people can come. And you know, that and we'd rather fill the room and it feel great. And, you know, it probably has a little bit of an impact on my pocket, but like it essentially, like it felt cool and it felt, and that is still the case today. Like we do some tour, like Josh and I are both from Southampton, so like we put on, that's something we consciously made sure that. So, and Josh was based in London for, you know, for the first 8 years of So Young, so we consciously kept Southampton out of our anything in the narrative. But now that we've kind of built So Young to be what it kind of is now, is we've now teamed up with my brother Jamie, who is a promoter, and we put on touring shows in Southampton. So we do, you know, treat So Young as a business in the live world in Southampton, but in London it's just about putting on great shows and fun stuff as early as possible and getting people in the room.
That's awesome. I think that's a really, really good point to end it on as well. And thank you so much, Jamie. I mean, Sam, just because you just said Jamie. Thanks so much. That was amazing. And it was, I feel like I just had loads of questions that I wanted to ask you genuinely. So I think I got all of those in as well. It was really, really cool. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
I don't know when the next direct input is off the top of my head. I think it's in 2 weeks with Hinako Omori, who I'm really excited to talk to. Yeah, so thanks everyone, and thanks Sam, and I'll speak to you really, really soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.